In 1919, in a small southern town, a young black man named Elijah Carter was known for one thing. He refused to lower his head. At just 22 years old, Elijah had managed to build something rare for the time, a small, successful grocery business on the edge of town. People respected him. Some didn't. First, it was small. Whispers, cold stares, white men passing by his store, just watching, waiting. Then one day, everything changed. A white woman from a nearby neighborhood accused Elijah of something no one could prove, but no one questioned it. They didn't investigate. They didn't ask for evidence. They just believed her. By nightfall, a crowd had formed. Dozens of men. Angry, armed, loud. They dragged Elijah out of his store. Right in front of people who knew him. People who had bought food from him just hours earlier. He tried to speak. Tried to explain. But his voice was drowned out. By shouting. By hatred. By a mob that had already decided his fate. They beat him. Over and over. In the middle of the street. Under the glow of lanterns. And the silence of witnesses. Some watched in fear. Others cheered. And when his body finally hit the ground, they didn't stop. By morning, Elijah Carter was gone. But the story didn't end there. His store was destroyed, burned, erased, as if he had never existed. His family, forced to leave town, with nothing. And the men responsible? They were arrested, but quickly released. No charges, no trial, no justice. Because in that town, his life didn't carry the same weight. For years, no one spoke about what happened. It was buried, ignored, silenced. But whispers have a way of surviving. And the truth doesn't stay hidden forever. Because what people didn't know was that someone saw everything that night. Someone who stayed quiet for decades. And what they were about to reveal would change the entire story. But that part was never meant to come out. For years, no one knew there was a witness. Because the only person who saw everything was a child. And children back then weren't supposed to speak. His name was Samuel, just 9 years old, standing in the shadows that night, watching something he would never forget. He saw Elijah dragged into the street. He heard the shouting, the laughter, the sound of fists hitting flesh. But there was something else, something no one ever reported. Before the mob even formed, 2 men had already been inside Elijah's store, arguing, quiet, but tense. Samuel recognized them. They weren't strangers. They were respected, powerful. One of them was the brother of the woman who made the accusation. And the other was a local official. That night wasn't random. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't chaos. It was planned. Samuel kept that secret for most of his life. Because speaking up back then could get you killed. Decades passed. The town changed. People moved on. Or at least, pretended to. But Samuel never forgot. In 1972, over 50 years later, he finally told his story. What he revealed shocked the few who were willing to listen. The accusation, a lie. Elijah had refused to sell his store. That was it. The land his shop sat on had suddenly become valuable, and certain people wanted it. So they created a story, spread it, and let the mob do the rest. And it worked. After Elijah's death, the land was quietly taken, sold, redeveloped. No investigation, no questions, just profit. Samuel's testimony should have changed everything. But by then, it was too late. The men involved were gone, dead, untouchable. No charges were ever filed. No case reopened. Just a truth, arriving decades too late. Today, nothing remains of Elijah's store. No sign, no marker, no official record of what happened that night. Just a story, almost erased. But here's what still doesn't make sense. If it was all about the land, then why did the violence go so far? Why did they need a crowd? Why did they need fear? And who else was involved behind the scenes? Because Samuel only saw part of it. And some truths are still buried. They said it was over, that the truth had already come out, that there was nothing left to find. But they were wrong, because years after Samuel spoke, someone else started asking questions. A young journalist, new to the town, curious enough not to let it go. She wasn't there in 1919. She didn't know Elijah, but something about the story didn't sit right. Missing records, contradictions, names that kept appearing in places they shouldn't. So she started digging. Old property files, city documents, buried archives no one had touched in decades. And that's when she found it. A document, dated just weeks after Elijah's death. It showed the land, already reassigned. Not months later, not years later, weeks. And the name signed on the approval, the same local official Samuel had mentioned. But that wasn't the most disturbing part, because attached to that document was something else. A list, names, not one, not two, but several men, all connected, all involved, business owners, city figures, men with influence. This wasn't just a mob. It was organized, planned, executed, and then covered up. The journalist tried to publish everything, every name, every detail, but the story never made it out the way it should have. Parts of it disappeared. Editors pulled back. Pressure started building. And then, she received a warning. Not public, not direct, but clear enough. Some stories are better left alone. She didn't stop, but something changed, because shortly after, the documents she found went missing, gone from the archives, as if they were never there. No backup, no trace, just like Elijah's story, all over again. Today, there are still no official records connecting those men. No investigation reopened. No justice served. Just fragments, whispers, and one undeniable truth. What happened to Elijah Carter was never just about one man. It was something bigger, something planned, and maybe something that was never meant to be uncovered. Because if those records disappeared once, who's to say they won't disappear again? For decades, the truth kept slipping through the cracks, almost like someone was making sure it stayed buried. But stories like this, they don't disappear. They wait. Years after the journalist's investigation faded, a small group of historians took interest in the case. Not because it was famous, but because it wasn't. They noticed the gaps, missing documents, altered records, silence where there should have been answers. So they started rebuilding the story, piece by piece. Old newspapers, family testimonies, fragments of records that somehow survived. And slowly, a clearer picture began to form. Elijah Carter wasn't just targeted for his success. He was in the way. The land, the location, the future value. Everything had already been decided before that night. The accusation, just a trigger. The mob, just a tool. And the violence, a message. But here's what changed everything. One of Elijah's distant relatives came forward with something no one expected. A letter, old, worn, hidden for generations, written just days before Elijah died. In it, he mentioned being threatened, not by strangers, but by men with power, men who told him to leave, or else. He refused, and days later, he was gone. That letter confirmed what many had suspected, but could never prove. This wasn't random. It was intentional, calculated. And for over a century, it worked. No justice, no accountability, no official acknowledgement, just silence. Until now. Because today, people are finally starting to tell his story, not just as history, but as a warning of what can happen when truth is ignored, when power goes unchecked, when silence is chosen over justice. Elijah Carter's name was almost erased, but almost isn't enough, because now, his story is being heard. And the question is no longer, what happened? How many more stories like this were buried? If you want more stories like this, stories they tried to hide, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, because the next story might be even darker.